Hello horror lovers, welcome to the channel. Before the terror begins, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, as it will help me a lot. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the crisp forest air filled my lungs as I set out on what should have been a relaxing hike. The sun peeked through the canopy of leaves, dappling the forest floor with patches of warm light. I adjusted my backpack, feeling the weight of my water bottle and snacks shift against my back. Just a quick day hike, I had told my roommate that morning. I'll be back before dinner. If only I had known how wrong I would be. The trail started easily enough, a well-worn path that meandered through towering pines and ancient oaks. The familiar crunch of leaves and twigs under my boots was comforting, a rhythm that matched my steady breathing as I climbed gentle slopes and navigated around moss-covered boulders. As I ventured deeper into the woods, an eerie silence descended, sending shivers down my spine. The cheerful bird song that had accompanied the first leg of my journey faded away, replaced by an oppressive quiet that seemed to press in from all sides. Even the rustle of leaves in the breeze seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I paused, taking a swig from my water bottle and glancing around. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Anyone there?" Only silence answered me. Shaking off the growing sense of unease, I pressed on. The trail began to narrow, becoming less defined as I moved into a part of the forest that seemed less traveled. Branches reached out like gnarled fingers, snagging my clothes and scratching at my exposed skin. "Come on, Mark," I muttered to myself. "It's just a forest, nothing to be afraid of." But as the words left my lips, my heart began to race. Something felt off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That's when I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, barely visible in the deepening gloom of the forest, stood an old, dilapidated cabin. Its weathered boards were gray with age, the roof sagging under the weight of years of neglect. Vines crawled up the walls, nature slowly reclaiming what man had abandoned. Curiosity overcame my fear as I approached the weathered door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. Part of me screamed to turn back, to return to the safety of the main trail and forget I'd ever seen this place. But a stronger urge pushed me forward, a need to uncover the secrets this isolated cabin might hold. "Hello?" I called out again, rapping my knuckles against the door. "Is anyone here?" The sound echoed hollowly, emphasizing the emptiness of the place. After a moment's hesitation, I tried the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily, the door swinging inward with a groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the structure. The hinges creaked ominously as I stepped inside, the musty air making me gag. Dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, giving the cabin an otherworldly atmosphere. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight to better illuminate the interior. "Oh my God," I whispered, my eyes widening as the beam of light swept across the room. The cabin was sparsely furnished with a rickety table, a couple of chairs, and an old iron bedstead in one corner. But it was the walls that caught my attention. They were covered in photographs and newspaper clippings, a chaotic collage that sent a chill down my spine. As I moved closer, the images came into focus, and my blood ran cold. The photos showed people, men and women of various ages, in states of terror and pain. Some were bound, others bore visible injuries. And the newspaper clippings, they were all about missing persons cases. "This can't be real," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "This has to be some kind of sick joke." But as I continued to explore the cabin, opening drawers and cabinets, I realized with growing horror that this was no joke. This was evidence. Evidence of torture, of murder, of unspeakable crimes committed in the heart of these peaceful woods. With shaking hands, I opened a drawer, revealing a stack of photographs that made my stomach churn. Each image was more graphic than the last, documenting acts of violence that I could scarcely comprehend. Tears blurred my vision as I flipped through the photos, each one more horrific than the last. I wanted to look away, to run from this place and never return, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the evidence of so much suffering. A scream caught in my throat as I realized the magnitude of the evil that had occurred here. This cabin, hidden away in the forest, had been a house of horrors for who knew how many victims. And I, on what should have been a simple hike, had stumbled right into the lair of a monster. As the full weight of my discovery settled over me, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. My peaceful hike had turned into a nightmare, and I was standing at the threshold of a darkness I never could have imagined existed in these woods. Little did I know my ordeal was only beginning. Dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through grimy windows, giving the cabin an otherworldly atmosphere. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process the horrors surrounding me. The walls, covered in gruesome photographs and newspaper clippings, seemed to close in, making the air thick and suffocating. "This can't be happening," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. "I need to get out of here." But my feet refused to move. A morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot, my eyes unable to look away from the evidence of unspeakable crimes. I took a tentative step forward, the floorboard creaking beneath my weight. As I moved deeper into the cabin, strange stains on the floor and walls caught my attention. Dark splatters and smears that I desperately wanted to believe were just rust or dirt, but my gut told me otherwise. My blood ran cold as I realized the true nature of these stains. "Oh God," I choked out, bile rising in my throat. That's blood." I stumbled backwards, my back hitting a set of drawers. The impact caused one to slide open slightly. With shaking hands, I pulled it open further, revealing a stack of photographs that made my stomach churn. No, I muttered, unable to stop myself from picking up the first photo. The image showed a young woman, her eyes wide with terror, bound to a chair in what appeared to be this very cabin. I flipped to the next photo, and the next, each one more horrific than the last. Men, women, even teenagers, all captured in moments of absolute fear and pain. Tears blurred my vision as I continued to flip through the photos, unable to stop despite the growing horror in my chest. These weren't just random victims. These were missing persons I'd seen on the news, faces that had stared out from flyers and billboards. "How long has this been going on?" I asked the empty room, my voice barely above a whisper. A noise from outside snapped me back to reality. The crunch of leaves, a twig snapping. Someone was approaching the cabin. Panic seized me as I realized I'd left the door open behind me. "Hello?" a gruff voice called out. "Someone in there?" My heart leaped into my throat. I had to hide, had to find a way out. But where? The cabin was small, with few places to conceal myself. My eyes darted around frantically, finally landing on a small trapdoor in the corner, partially hidden by a ratty rug. Without thinking, I dashed towards it, lifting the rug and yanking open the door. The hinges groaned in protest, and I winced at the noise. Below, a ladder descended into darkness. The footsteps outside grew closer. "I know you're in there. Come on out. Nice and easy." With no other choice, I lowered myself into the hole, pulling the trapdoor shut above me. Darkness enveloped me as I clung to the ladder, hardly daring to breathe. The musty smell of earth and decay filled my nostrils, making me gag silently. Above, I heard the cabin door swing open. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor, pausing every few seconds. "Where are you, you little snoop?" The voice growled, closer now. "Thought you'd come poking around where you don't belong, huh?" I pressed myself against the ladder, willing myself to become invisible. The footsteps moved around the cabin, growing louder as they approached my hiding spot. My hands were slick with sweat, threatening to lose their grip on the ladder rungs. Suddenly, a shaft of light pierced the darkness as the trapdoor was flung open. I looked up, my eyes meeting those of a large, bearded man, his face twisted into a cruel smile. Well, he chuckled darkly. "What do we have here? A little rat in my cellar." Before I could react, a meaty hand reached down, grabbing my arm in an iron grip. I cried out in pain and fear as I was hauled upwards, out of the hole and onto the cabin floor. "Please," I gasped, struggling against his grip. "I didn't mean to. I was just hiking. I got lost." "Shut up," he roared, backhanding me across the face. Stars exploded in my vision as I tasted blood. He dragged me to a chair, roughly shoving me down onto it. "You've seen too much, boy. Can't have you running off to the police now, can we?" As he began to bind my wrists to the chair arms with duct tape, I realized with horror that I was living out the scenes from those photographs. I was becoming another victim, another face that would stare out from missing person posters. "Someone will come looking for me," I said, trying to keep the terror out of my voice. "They'll find this place." The man laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. "Oh, they might look, but they won't find you. No one ever does." As he finished securing me to the chair, he stood back, admiring his handiwork. "Now then," he said, reaching for a camera on a nearby shelf. "Let's make some memories, shall we?" The flash blinded me momentarily, and I knew that my image had just joined the horrifying gallery on the walls. As my captor grinned at me, I realized that my nightmare was only beginning, and that I might never see the light of day again. Panic set in as I frantically searched for an exit, the cabin suddenly feeling like a tomb. My captor had left me alone, bound to the chair, while he stepped outside to prepare some things. His vague words sent chills down my spine, my imagination running wild with terrifying possibilities. "Think, Mark, think," I muttered to myself, twisting my wrists against the duct tape. The adhesive bit into my skin, but I ignored the pain, focusing instead on finding any weakness in my bonds. The cabin, once merely eerie, now felt suffocating. The faces in the photographs seemed to watch me, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and hopelessness. I refused to accept that I would join them, become just another tragic image on these blood-stained walls. As I struggled, my ears strained for any sound from outside. The forest's unnatural silence had returned, broken only by the occasional creak of the cabin's timbers. Then suddenly I heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching from outside. My heart pounded in my ears as I heard the cabin door start to open. Desperation gave me strength, and with a final, painful twist, I managed to free one hand from the tape. Just as the door swung wide, I lunged forward, toppling the chair and myself to the floor. "What the hell?" My captor's gruff voice boomed as he entered. "Trying to escape, are we?" I scrambled to my feet, my free hand working furiously to release my other wrist. The man lunged at me, but I managed to dodge, putting the rickety table between us. "Stay back!" I shouted, grabbing a rusted lamp from the table and brandishing it like a weapon. "I swear I'll bash your head in if you come any closer." The man's eyes narrowed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Oh, I do love it when they fight back. Makes the hunt so much more exciting. He feinted to the left, then quickly moved right, trying to circle around the table. I matched his movements, keeping the barrier between us. My eyes darted to the open door behind him, my only chance at freedom. "You won't get away," he growled, his patience clearly wearing thin. "No one ever does. Why don't you make it easier on yourself and just give up?" "Never," I spat back, surprised by the venom in my own voice. "I'm not going to be another one of your victims." With a roar of frustration, he suddenly flipped the table, sending it crashing towards me. I stumbled backwards, losing my grip on the lamp. It clattered to the floor as I made a desperate dash for the door. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I would make it. The cool forest air hit my face as I crossed the threshold, but then I felt iron-strong fingers close around my arm, yanking me back with brutal force. "No!" I screamed, clawing at the doorframe. "Help! Somebody help me!" My captor's laughter drowned out my cries as he dragged me back into the cabin. "Scream all you want, boy. Ain't nobody gonna hear you out here." Terror paralyzed me as the door swung shut, cutting off my last view of the outside world. The man spun me around, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and rancid. "Now," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "we're gonna have to teach you some manners." His fist connected with my stomach, driving the air from my lungs. I doubled over, gasping, only to be met with a knee to the face. Pain exploded behind my eyes as I felt my nose crack. Through the haze of pain, I heard him moving around the cabin, opening drawers and muttering to himself. Where did I put that? Ah, here we go. I managed to lift my head, blinking through the tears and blood. My heart nearly stopped as I saw what he held. A syringe filled with an unknown cloudy liquid. No, I whimpered, trying to crawl away. Please don't. Shh, shh, he cooed, approaching me with the needle. This'll make you nice and cooperative. Can't have you trying to run off again, can we? I tried to fight as he grabbed my arm, but the beating had left me weak. I felt the sharp prick of the needle, followed by a burning sensation as he injected the drug. There we go, he said, almost tenderly. Just relax now. It'll all be over soon. The room began to spin, the faces on the walls blurring together into a nightmarish collage. I felt my limbs growing heavy, my thoughts becoming sluggish. Why? I managed to slur. Why are you doing this? He crouched down beside me, running a hand through my hair in a twisted parody of comfort. Because I can, he whispered. Because there's nothing quite like the thrill of the hunt, of holding someone's life in your hands. As consciousness began to slip away, I heard him stand up, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Rest up now. His voice seemed to come from far away. When you wake up, the real fun begins. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was his silhouette against the dim light, a predator savoring the capture of his prey. Then, mercifully, everything faded to black. Pain exploded behind my eyes as I awoke, finding myself bound and gagged in a dank cellar. The musty smell of earth and decay filled my nostrils, making me gag against the cloth stuffed in my mouth. As my vision slowly adjusted to the dim light, I realized I was no longer in the cabin, but in some underground chamber beneath it. Panic surged through me as I tested my bonds. My wrists and ankles were securely fastened to a cold metal chair, the restraints biting into my skin with every movement. Tears streamed down my face as I struggled, the reality of my situation sinking in. Ah, Sleeping Beauty awakes, a gravelly voice called from the shadows. My captor emerged, his hulking form looming over me. Did you have pleasant dreams? I hope so, because your waking hours are about to become a nightmare. He circled around me, his eyes gleaming with malice. I tried to speak, to plead, but the gag muffled my words into incomprehensible mumbles. Oh, you want to say something? He mocked, leaning in close. His breath was hot on my face, reeking of stale cigarettes and something metallic. Well, too bad. I prefer my guests to be seen and not heard, at least, not until I want to hear them scream. My heart raced as he moved to a workbench along the wall, littered with an assortment of tools and devices I couldn't bear to examine too closely. He selected something and turned back to me, a wicked grin splitting his face. Now let's have some fun, shall we? He said, brandishing a wickedly sharp knife. I think it's time you and I got to know each other better. As he approached, I thrashed wildly in the chair, desperate to escape. But my efforts were futile, the restraints held firm. Struggle all you want, he chuckled darkly. It only makes it more exciting for me. The knife glinted in the dim light as he pressed it against my cheek, not quite breaking the skin. I whimpered, squeezing my eyes shut. Open your eyes, he commanded. When I didn't comply, he slapped me hard across the face. I said, open them. Reluctantly, I obeyed, meeting his gaze. What I saw there chilled me to my core, not anger or hatred, but a cold, calculating interest, as if I were some fascinating specimen to be dissected. That's better, he nodded approvingly. I want you to see everything, to fully experience what's about to happen. It's so much more satisfying that way. He began to detail his twisted plans for me, his newest victim. Each word drove the nail of despair deeper into my heart. The things he described were beyond inhumane, beyond comprehension. I wanted to block it out, to retreat into the safety of my mind, but he wouldn't let me, forcing me to engage with every horrific detail. Why? I managed to mumble through the gag, tears streaming down my face. He paused, considering the question. Why? Oh, my dear boy, why not? The world is full of predators and prey. I simply embrace my true nature. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. And let me tell you a secret. I've never felt more alive than when I'm deciding whether someone lives or dies. As he continued to monologue, detailing past victims and future plans, a horrifying realization dawned on me. No one knew where I was. I had told my roommate I was going for a hike, but I hadn't specified where. The trail I had wandered off was rarely used. It could be days before anyone even realized I was missing. Despair overwhelmed me as I realized no one would come looking for me, at least not in time. In this moment, trapped in this underground hell with a monster, I had never felt more alone. I can see it in your eyes, my captor said, almost gently. That moment when hope dies. It's beautiful, really. But don't worry. We're just getting started. Who knows? You might surprise me. Some of them do, you know. They find strength they never knew they had. He moved back to his workbench, rummaging through the tools there. Of course, in the end, it doesn't matter. Strong or weak, they all break eventually. But the ones who fight, they're my favorites. As he turned back to me, some cruel implement in hand, I closed my eyes again, trying to find any shred of courage or strength within me. I thought of my family, my friends, all the people I might never see again. I thought of the other victims, their faces haunting me from those photographs upstairs. In that moment, something shifted within me. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, the situation seemed hopeless, but I wasn't dead yet. And as long as I was alive, there was a chance, however slim, of survival. I opened my eyes, meeting my captor's gaze steadily. I couldn't speak through the gag, but I tried to convey a message with my eyes. I wouldn't break easily. I would fight. A slow smile spread across his face, as if he understood the unspoken challenge. Oh, this is going to be fun, he said, raising his chosen tool. Let the games begin. As he approached, I steeled myself for what was to come. I didn't know if I would survive this ordeal, but I was determined to try. Somehow, some way, I had to find a way to escape, to expose this monster, to ensure he could never hurt anyone else again. The real test was just beginning, and I prayed I would have the strength to endure. My wrists burned as I slowly worked to fray the ropes binding me, using the rusty nail as a saw. Hours had passed since my captor's last visit, leaving me alone in the dank cellar with nothing but pain and the faint hope of escape. Every creak and groan of the cabin above sent waves of fear through me, afraid of being discovered in my desperate attempt at freedom. Come on, I muttered through gritted teeth, my voice hoarse from screaming during the earlier session with my tormentor. The nail dug into my palm, drawing blood, but I ignored the pain. It was nothing compared to what I'd already endured. As I worked, I forced myself to focus on the task at hand, pushing away the horrific memories of the past few hours. The man's laughter, the searing pain, the sound of my own screams, all of it threatened to overwhelm me if I let my guard down for even a moment. Suddenly, a loud thump from above made me freeze. Footsteps crossed the floor of the cabin, heading towards the cellar door. Panic surged through me as I realized I was out of time. No, I whispered frantically, redoubling my efforts on the ropes. Please, just a little more time. The cellar door creaked open and heavy footsteps descended the stairs. I quickly hid the nail in my fist, praying my captor wouldn't notice the progress I'd made on the ropes. Well, his gravelly voice called out as he reached the bottom of the stairs. How's my guest doing? Comfortable? I remained silent, glaring at him with all the defiance I could muster. He chuckled, clearly amused by my attempt at bravery. Still got some fight in you, eh? He said, circling my chair. Good. I was worried our last little chat might have broken your spirit. It's no fun when they give up too quickly. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. But don't worry. We have all the time in the world to explore just how much you can take before you break. I turned my head away, fighting the urge to vomit. Someone will come looking for me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They'll find this place. He laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humanity. Oh, they might look, but they won't find you. No one ever does. You'd be surprised how easy it is for people to just disappear. As he spoke, he moved to a table nearby, picking up a wicked-looking tool I couldn't identify. Now, shall we pick up where we left off? Desperation gave me strength. In that moment, I knew it was now or never. With a sudden burst of energy, I yanked hard on the frayed ropes. To my amazement and relief, they finally gave way. My captor's eyes widened in surprise as I lunged from the chair, tackling him to the ground. The tool clattered across the floor as we grappled, each fighting for dominance. "You little bastard!" he snarled, his fist connecting with my jaw. Stars exploded in my vision, but adrenaline kept me going. I managed to land a solid punch to his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him. Taking advantage of his momentary weakness, I scrambled to my feet and made a dash for the stairs. My legs, weak from hours of captivity, nearly gave out beneath me, but sheer will kept me moving. "Get back here!" he roared behind me, already recovering and giving chase. I burst through the cellar door into the cabin proper, my eyes frantically searching for an exit. The front door seemed miles away, but it was my only chance. I ran for it, my heart pounding in my ears. Just as my hand grasped the doorknob, I felt his fingers close around my ankle. I went down hard, my chin cracking against the wooden floor. "Thought you could escape, did you?" he growled, dragging me back. "I'm going to make you regret that." In desperation, I kicked out wildly, feeling my foot connect with something solid. A howl of pain told me I'd found my mark. His grip loosened and I scrambled forward, finally reaching the door. Cold night air hit my face as I stumbled outside, the forest dark and foreboding around me. But anywhere was better than that cabin of horrors. I ran blindly into the woods, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. Behind me, I could hear him crashing through the underbrush, his enraged shouts echoing through the trees. "I'll find you. You can't hide from me." Terror lent me speed I didn't know I possessed. I ran and ran with no idea where I was going, only knowing I had to put as much distance between myself and that monster as possible. As I ran, a glimmer of hope began to grow in my chest. I was out. I was free. Now I just had to survive long enough to find help, to expose the horrors I'd witnessed. The chase was on, a deadly game of cat and mouse in the dark forest. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I might make it out alive. With renewed determination, I pressed on into the night, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind me. The story wasn't over yet, but at least now I had a fighting chance. Freedom was within my grasp, and I was determined to seize it with everything I had left. Time seemed to stand still as we stared at each other, neither of us moving a muscle. I stood just inside the cabin's doorway, my hand still gripping the handle, while my captor loomed a few feet away, his eyes blazing with fury and a hint of surprise. "Well, well," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Aren't you full of surprises? I must say I'm impressed. It's been a while since one of my guests showed such initiative." I swallowed hard, my throat dry with fear. "I'm not your guest," I managed to croak out, "and I'm leaving, now." He chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, you and I still have so much to discuss." In a burst of desperation, I lunged for the door, my fingers grazing the handle before I was yanked back with brutal force. Pain exploded across my face as his fist connected, stars dancing in my vision. "No!" I screamed, clawing at his arms as he dragged me back into the cabin. "Let me go." "Shut up," he roared, throwing me to the floor. I tasted blood in my mouth as I hit the ground hard. Dazed, I tried to crawl away, but he was on me in an instant, flipping me onto my back and straddling my chest. His weight crushed the air from my lungs as his hands wrapped around my throat. "You ungrateful little shit," he snarled, his face inches from mine. "After all the hospitality I've shown you, this is how you repay me?" I gasped for air, my vision starting to darken around the edges. In desperation, I reached out, my hand closing around something solid on the floor beside me. Without thinking, I swung with all my might. There was a sickening crack as the object, a heavy wooden plank, connected with the side of his head. He reeled back, his grip on my throat loosening. I didn't waste a second, shoving him off me and scrambling to my feet. "You'll pay for that," he growled, blood trickling down the side of his face as he stood up unsteadily. I backed away, holding the plank in front of me like a shield. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shaking. "I swear I'll hit you again if you come any closer." He laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the cabin. "Oh, you've got spirit, I'll give you that. But do you really think you can win this? Look at you, weak, injured, alone. Face it, boy, you're not getting out of here alive." As he spoke, he slowly moved towards me, like a predator stalking its prey. I matched his movements, keeping the distance between us, my eyes darting around for any possible escape route. "You're wrong," I said, trying to inject confidence I didn't feel into my voice. "People will be looking for me. They'll find this place." He smirked, shaking his head. "No one's coming for you. No one ever does. Do you know how many have stood where you are now, making the same empty threats? They all break in the end. And so will you." A surge of strength born from fear allowed me to kick out, catching him off guard and buying myself precious seconds. I bolted for the door once again, my hand closing around the handle. But just as I started to pull it open, I felt his hand grab the back of my shirt, yanking me backwards. I lost my balance, tumbling to the floor, the plank clattering from my grasp. "Nice try," he sneered, looming over me. "But playtime's over now." As he reached down to grab me, I acted on pure instinct. I rolled, narrowly avoiding his grasp, and in one fluid motion, I swept my leg out, catching him behind the knees. He went down hard, his head cracking against the edge of a nearby table. For a moment he lay still, dazed by the impact. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I scrambled to my feet and ran, flinging the door open and bursting out into the cool night air. The forest loomed before me, dark and foreboding. I had no idea which way led to safety, but anywhere was better than that cabin of horrors. I picked a direction at random and ran, ignoring the pain in my battered body, driven by pure survival instinct. Behind me, I heard a bellow of rage. "You can run, but you can't hide. I know these woods better than you ever will." His voice spurred me on, pushing me to run faster, to ignore the branches whipping at my face and the roots threatening to trip me at every step. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but still I pressed on. As I ran, a tiny spark of hope flickered in my chest. I was out. I was free. Now I just had to survive long enough to find help, to expose the monster and his den of horrors. The chase was on, a deadly game of cat and mouse in the dark forest. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I might make it out alive. With renewed determination, I pressed on into the night, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind me. The story wasn't over yet, but at least now I had a fighting chance. Freedom was within my grasp, and I was determined to seize it with everything I had left. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. I had survived the night. Now, I just had to find my way back to civilization and ensure that the monster in the woods would never claim another victim again. My lungs burned as I sprinted through the forest, branches whipping at my face and arms. The first light of dawn was barely visible through the dense canopy, casting eerie shadows that seemed to reach out for me with every step. I could hear my pursuer crashing through the underbrush behind me, his enraged shouts echoing through the trees. "You can't run forever, boy," his gravelly voice boomed. "These are my woods. I know every inch of them." Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I realized the truth in his words. I was lost, exhausted, and injured. He, on the other hand, was on his home turf. But I couldn't give up. I wouldn't become another victim, another face in those horrific photographs. As I ran, I frantically searched for anything that might help me. A path, a sign of civilization, anything. Suddenly, through a break in the trees, I spotted something that made my heart leap. Lights in the distance. Civilization was within reach. "Thank God," I gasped, pushing myself harder towards the promise of safety. But as I drew closer, my heart sank. The lights weren't from a town or a highway as I'd hoped. Instead, I found myself at the edge of a steep ravine. The lights I'd seen were nothing more than the reflections of the rising sun on a distant river far below. "No, no, no," I muttered, panic rising in my chest. I was trapped. The sound of pursuit grew louder. I spun around, searching desperately for another escape route, but the forest behind me was a dark maze, and I knew he was out there, closing in. "I can smell your fear," his voice called out, closer now. "Why don't you make this easy on yourself and give up?" I backed up until I felt loose stones under my feet, signaling the edge of the ravine. Peering over, I saw a dizzying drop, the bottom obscured by mist and trees. It was too far to jump, too steep to climb down quickly. Time seemed to slow as I made the split-second decision. I could hear him now, just beyond the tree line. In moments, he would emerge, and it would all be over. "Please," I whispered to no one in particular, "let this work." Just as my pursuer burst through the trees, a look of triumph on his face, I turned and jumped. For a heart-stopping moment, I was in free fall, the wind rushing past me. Then I hit the slope of the ravine, my body tumbling and bouncing painfully down the steep incline. "No!" I heard him roar from above, his voice fading as I plummeted further down the ravine. Branches and rocks tore at my skin as I fell, each impact sending shock waves of pain through my body. I tried to curl into a ball, to protect my head, but I had no control over my descent. After what seemed like an eternity, I slammed into something solid, the trunk of a large tree growing out of the ravine wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment I lay there, dazed and gasping for air. "Get up," I wheezed to myself. "You have to keep moving." Groaning, I pushed myself to my feet, taking stock of my injuries. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed broken. A miracle, given the fall I'd just taken. Looking up, I could no longer see the top of the ravine. The dense foliage and the angle of the slope had hidden me from view. But I knew he wouldn't give up that easily. He'd find a way down, and then the hunt would continue. I started to move along the slope, using trees and rocks for support. Each step was agony, but the alternative, being recaptured, was unthinkable. As I stumbled along, I tried to formulate a plan. I needed to find water, both to drink and to throw off my scent if he brought dogs. I needed to find my way back to civilization, and most importantly, I needed to stay alive long enough to expose the horrors I'd witnessed. "One step at a time," I muttered, gritting my teeth against the pain. "Just keep moving." Hours passed as I made my way down the ravine. The sound of running water grew louder, giving me hope. Water meant life, and possibly a way out of this nightmare. Finally, I broke through the tree line and found myself on the banks of a swift-moving river. The sight of it brought tears to my eyes, both from relief and from the realization of how close I'd come to death. But I couldn't rest yet. I waded into the cold water, letting it wash away some of the blood and grime. Then, choosing a direction at random, I began to follow the river downstream. Rivers often led to towns or roads, and right now, that was my only hope. As I walked, I allowed myself to think about what would happen if, when, I made it back to safety. Would anyone believe my story? Would they be able to find the cabin, to stop the monster before he claimed more victims? "I have to try," I said aloud, my voice barely audible over the rush of the river. For all those who didn't make it out, for all those who might still be saved. With renewed determination, I pressed on. The nightmare wasn't over yet, but for the first time since it began, I felt a glimmer of real hope. I had survived the cabin, the chase, and the fall. Now, I just had to find my way back and make sure justice was served. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. I was still alive, still fighting, and as long as that was true, there was hope. Not just for me, but for all the potential victims I might save by exposing the truth. With that thought driving me forward, I continued my journey downstream, each step taking me closer to safety and further from the horrors I'd left behind. Pain shot through every nerve as I tumbled down the ravine, bouncing off rocks and trees. The world spun in a dizzying blur of green and brown, punctuated by sharp impacts that drove the breath from my lungs. Just when I thought it would never end, darkness enveloped me, my last thought a prayer that I'd survive. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When awareness slowly returned, the first thing I registered was the sound of rushing water. My eyes fluttered open, squinting against the harsh sunlight filtering through the trees above. "Ugh," I groaned, every inch of my body protesting as I tried to move. Where am I? Confusion clouded my mind as I took in my surroundings. I was lying at the bottom of the ravine, my battered body half submerged in a shallow stream. The events of the past few days came rushing back. The cabin, the torture, the desperate escape. A wave of nausea hit me as I remembered the horrors I'd witnessed and endured. "Focus, Mark," I muttered to myself, forcing my aching body into a sitting position. "You're not out of this yet." I took stock of my injuries. Miraculously, nothing seemed to be broken, though my body was a canvas of cuts, bruises, and what felt like at least a few cracked ribs. My clothes were torn and bloodied, barely hanging onto my frame. As I gathered my wits, a new sound caught my attention. Voices in the distance. For a moment, hope surged through me. Could it be rescuers? But then a chill ran down my spine as I recognized one of the voices. It was him, my captor. He'd found a way down the ravine and was searching for me. "He can't have gone far," I heard him shout. "Spread out and find him." Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I couldn't afford to lose my head now. I had to move to find help before he found me. With gritted teeth, I pulled myself to my feet, using a nearby tree for support. My legs shook beneath me, threatening to give out, but I willed them to hold. I couldn't go back to that cabin, I wouldn't. I spotted a hiking trail nearby, barely visible through the underbrush. Hope surged as I realized it might lead me back to civilization. "Please," I whispered, limping towards the trail. "Let this be the way out." Every step was agony, my battered body screaming in protest, but the sound of pursuit drove me forward. I couldn't let him catch me, not after everything I'd been through to escape. As I stumbled along the trail, my mind raced. How long had I been missing? Was anyone looking for me? Would anyone believe my story when I made it back? Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning as I focused solely on putting one foot in front of the other. The voices behind me faded, then disappeared altogether, but I didn't dare stop. He knew these woods better than I did. For all I knew, he could be lying in wait just around the next bend. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw something that made my heart leap. A sign. Weathered and barely legible, it pointed the way to a ranger station only 2 miles ahead. "Oh, thank God," I sobbed, relief washing over me. With renewed determination, I pressed on. Each step brought me closer to safety, to the chance to expose the horrors I'd witnessed and prevent anyone else from suffering the same fate. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw it, the ranger station. It was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me as I stumbled towards it, my vision blurring. Help! I tried to call out, but my voice was barely a whisper. Please, help me. The door to the station opened, and a figure stepped out. I couldn't make out their features, but I saw them start running towards me. Hey, are you all right? A voice called out, sounding distant and muffled. Relief washed over me as I finally reached the ranger station, collapsing into the arms of startled park employees. My legs gave out and I felt myself being lowered gently to the ground. What happened to you? One of the rangers asked, his voice filled with concern. You look like you've been through hell. I looked up at him, my vision swimming. You have no idea, I managed to croak out. Please, call the police. There's a cabin in the woods. A man. He's killing people. The rangers exchanged worried glances. Just take it easy, one of them said, pulling out a radio. We're getting help. You're safe now. As the world began to fade around me, I clung to that thought. I was safe. I had made it. Now, I just had to stay alive long enough to tell my story and make sure that monster was brought to justice. Stay with us, buddy, I heard one of the rangers say, as if from a great distance. Help is on the way. With those words echoing in my ears, I finally allowed myself to succumb to exhaustion. As consciousness slipped away, one last thought crossed my mind. This nightmare was finally over, but the real battle, to be believed, to see justice done, was just beginning. Relief washed over me as I finally reached the ranger station, collapsing into the arms of startled park employees. The world spun around me, faces blurring as exhaustion and pain threatened to pull me under. Easy there, son, a gruff voice said, strong arms lowering me gently to the ground. You're safe now. What in the world happened to you? I looked up, trying to focus on the face of the older ranger kneeling beside me. His weathered features were etched with concern as he took in my battered appearance. Water, I croaked, my throat raw and parched. Please. A bottle was pressed to my lips, and I drank greedily, the cool liquid bringing me back to full awareness. As I caught my breath, the reality of my situation came crashing down. I was safe, but the nightmare was far from over. There's a cabin, I gasped, grabbing the ranger's arm. In the woods. A man. He's killing people. You have to believe me. The rangers exchanged worried glances. The younger one pulled out a radio, speaking quietly into it while keeping an eye on me. Slow down, son, the older ranger said, his voice calm but authoritative. Start from the beginning. What's your name? Mark, I replied, my voice shaking. Mark Thompson. I was hiking, got lost, found this cabin. There were pictures, so many pictures of people, tortured, dead. He caught me, kept me prisoner. I escaped, but he chased me. I fell down a ravine to get away. As I spoke, I saw the disbelief in their eyes slowly turn to horror. The younger ranger's hand tightened on his radio, and he stepped away to make another call. Jesus, the older ranger muttered. Okay, Mark, we're going to get you some help. The police are on their way. True to his word, within minutes, I heard the wail of sirens approaching. 2 police cars and an ambulance pulled up, and suddenly the small ranger station was a flurry of activity. Paramedics swarmed around me, checking my vitals and tending to my injuries. A blanket was draped over my shoulders as a female officer knelt beside me, her eyes kind but professional. Mr. Thompson, I'm Officer Sarah Bennett, she said softly. I know you've been through a lot, but can you tell me what happened? Once again, I recounted my horrific experience. As I spoke, I saw her expression change from skepticism to growing concern. She jotted notes in a small pad, occasionally asking for clarification. Did you see any other victims in the cabin? She asked. I shook my head. No, just the pictures. So many pictures. And videos. He said there had been others before me. Officer Bennett nodded grimly. We'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement once the paramedics clear you. We'll also need you to guide us back to this cabin if you're up for it. The thought of going back there made my stomach churn, but I nodded. I have to. Those people, their families deserve to know what happened to them. As the paramedics prepared to transport me to the hospital, I overheard snippets of conversation between the officers and rangers. Missing hikers over the years. Never found any bodies. Could this really be connected? My voice shook as I called out to Officer Bennett. It's all connected. He told me. He's been doing this for years. You have to find him before he hurts anyone else. She approached me, her face serious. We will, Mark, I promise you, we're taking this very seriously. But right now, you need to focus on getting better. We'll need your help to find this place. As they loaded me into the ambulance, a terrible thought struck me. Wait, I called out. He knows these woods. He might be watching. What if he comes after me? Officer Bennett's expression softened slightly. Don't worry. We'll have an officer with you at all times. You're safe now. As the ambulance doors closed and we began to move, I leaned back on the stretcher, the events of the past few days crashing over me in waves. I was safe, yes, but the ordeal was far from over. There were still so many questions, so much to be done. The paramedic beside me checked my vitals, his face kind. Try to rest, he said gently. You're in good hands now. I nodded, closing my eyes as exhaustion finally overtook me. But even as I drifted off, images of the cabin, the photographs, and the man who had held me captive flashed behind my eyelids. I knew that even though I had escaped, the memories would haunt me for a long time to come. As the ambulance sped towards the hospital, I made a silent vow. I would see this through to the end. I would make sure that monster was caught, that justice was served for all his victims. It was the least I could do for those who hadn't been as lucky as me. With that thought, I surrendered to unconsciousness, hoping that when I woke, this nightmare would be one step closer to being over for good. Frustration built as days passed with no sign of the cabin or my attacker being found. I sat in the small interview room at the police station, my leg bouncing nervously as Detective Sarah Bennett pored over a map spread out on the table between us. Are you sure it was in this area, Mark? She asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. I leaned forward, wincing as my still healing ribs protested the movement. I think so. Everything happened so fast, and I was disoriented, but I'm almost certain it was somewhere in this region. Detective Bennett sighed, running a hand through her hair. We've combed through these areas multiple times. No signs of a cabin, no disturbed earth that might indicate buried victims. It's like we're chasing a ghost. I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes, the same look I'd seen on the faces of other officers over the past few days. My heart sank as I realized they were starting to question my story. You do believe me, don't you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her expression softening. I believe something terrible happened to you, Mark. Your injuries, your trauma, they're very real. But without concrete evidence, I know what I saw, I exclaimed, slamming my hand on the table. The sudden outburst startled us both, and I took a deep breath to calm myself. I'm sorry, it's just, I can still see those photographs, those faces. They were real people, Detective. They deserve justice. Detective Bennett nodded, her face grave. I understand, Mark. We're not giving up. We've got teams searching the woods, and we're cross-referencing missing persons reports from the last several years. If there's a connection, we'll find it. As we continued to discuss possible locations, a knock at the door interrupted us. Officer Johnson, a young policeman I'd come to know over the past few days, poked his head in. Detective, we've got something, he said, his eyes bright with excitement. A hiker reported finding an old foundation deep in the woods. It's not on any of our maps. My heart leaped into my throat. That could be it, I exclaimed, standing up so quickly that my chair toppled backward. We have to go check it out. Detective Bennett held up a hand. Slow down, Mark. We'll investigate. But you're not coming with us. It's too dangerous, and you're still recovering. But I can identify the place, I protested. I might remember something when I see it. She shook her head firmly. No, Mark. We'll handle this. I promise we'll keep you updated. Frustration welled up inside me as I watched them prepare to leave. I knew I should be relieved that they had a lead, but the thought of sitting here, helpless, while they investigated was almost unbearable. As Detective Bennett gathered her things, she paused, looking at me with a mix of sympathy and determination. I know this is hard for you, Mark, but please, trust us to do our job. We want to catch this guy as much as you do. I nodded reluctantly, sinking back into my chair. Just be careful, I said. He knows those woods better than anyone. If it is the right place, he might be watching. She gave me a reassuring smile. We'll be careful. Try to get some rest. I'll call you as soon as we know anything. As they left, I found myself alone in the quiet interview room. The walls seemed to close in around me, and suddenly I couldn't bear to be there anymore. I needed air, needed to feel like I was doing something, anything. I made my way out of the station, nodding to the officer assigned to keep an eye on me. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air helped clear my head a bit. I started walking, no real destination in mind, just needing to move. My mind raced with possibilities. What if they found the cabin? What if they didn't? What if it was the wrong place entirely? The uncertainty was eating away at me. As I walked, I found myself in a small park near the station. I sat on a bench watching as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky. A mix of emotions churned inside me. Hope that this lead might pan out, fear of what they might find, and a gnawing worry that somehow the monster who had held me captive might still be out there, watching, waiting. Hours passed as I sat there lost in thought. Finally, my phone buzzed, startling me out of my reverie. It was a text from Detective Bennett. We found it. Come to the station first thing tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss. My heart raced as I read the message. They had found it. After days of doubt and frustration, they had finally found the cabin. A wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of anxiety. What exactly had they found? What horrors would be revealed? As I made my way back to the safe house where I'd been staying, I knew sleep would be impossible tonight. Tomorrow would bring answers, but I had a feeling it would also bring new questions, new challenges. The nightmare wasn't over yet, but nausea overwhelmed me as we approached the cabin, memories of my ordeal threatening to surface. The forest, once a place of peace and adventure, now loomed ominously around us. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a shiver down my spine. You okay, Mark? Officer Bennett asked, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. We can take a break if you need it. I swallowed hard, shaking my head. No, I'm fine. We need to do this. Our small group consisted of myself, Officer Bennett, 2 other police officers, and a forest ranger. All were armed, their eyes scanning the woods constantly. The weight of their protective presence was reassuring, but it couldn't completely quell the fear churning in my gut. As we crested a small hill, I saw it. The cabin stood just as I remembered, a sinister blight on the otherwise beautiful landscape. My steps faltered, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. That's it, I whispered, my voice barely audible. That's where he kept me. Officer Bennett nodded grimly, speaking into her radio. We've located the site, requesting backup and forensics team to our location. The group moved forward cautiously, weapons at the ready. As we approached the front door, memories flooded back. My initial curiosity, the horror of discovery, the desperate escape attempt. Mr. Thompson, one of the officers said, breaking me from my reverie. We need you to stay back while we clear the building. Officer Chen will stay with you. I nodded numbly, watching as they entered the cabin, calling out, Clear! Room by room. The minutes stretched on, each second an eternity. Finally, Officer Bennett emerged. It's empty, she said, her expression a mix of relief and frustration. But there's evidence of recent occupation. And Mark, the photos you mentioned. They're still there. My hands shook as I pointed out key locations to the investigators, reliving each terrifying moment. "The cellar," I said, my voice trembling. "That's where he kept me." As we descended the rickety stairs into the dank cellar, a chill ran down my spine. The chair I had been bound to still stood in the center of the room, ropes dangling ominously. "Jesus," one of the officers muttered, taking in the grim scene. Tears streamed down my face as more victims were discovered, not physically present but documented in meticulously organized files and hard drives. The true scope of the killer's depravity was revealed with each new piece of evidence uncovered. "How many?" I asked, dreading the answer. Officer Bennett's face was grim. "It's too early to say for certain, but it looks like this has been going on for years, possibly decades." A wave of guilt washed over me. How many lives could have been saved if I had found this place sooner? If I had been stronger, faster in my escape? As if reading my thoughts, Officer Bennett placed a hand on my arm. "You did good, Mark. Without you, we might never have found this place. You've given these victims and their families a chance at justice." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. As the forensics team arrived and began their meticulous work, I found myself drawn to a wall covered in photographs. Each image told a story of terror and pain, faces frozen in moments of absolute fear. "Do you recognize any of them?" an investigator asked gently. I shook my head. "No, but..." "Wait." My eyes landed on a familiar face. Her. I remember seeing her on the news. She went missing a few years ago while hiking. A glimmer of hope emerged as crucial evidence was uncovered, bringing us closer to identifying the murderer. Fingerprints, DNA samples, and detailed records were carefully collected and cataloged. As the day wore on, I found myself mentally and emotionally exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept me going began to fade, leaving me feeling hollow and drained. Officer Bennett approached me, her face showing signs of the long day as well. "Mark, I think we've got everything we need for now. You've been incredibly helpful. Let's get you out of here." As we prepared to leave, I took one last look around the cabin. This place, which had been the setting for so much pain and terror, would soon be just another crime scene. But for me, and for countless others, its horror would live on in our memories. "What happens now?" I asked as we made our way back through the forest. "Now," Officer Bennett said, her voice filled with determination. "We hunt. Every piece of evidence, every clue you've given us, it all helps build the case. We'll find him, Mark. I promise you that." As we emerged from the tree line, I saw the sun beginning to set. It had been a long, grueling day, but it felt like a turning point. The nightmare wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time I felt like we were making progress. "Thank you," I said quietly to Officer Bennett as we reached the vehicles. "For believing me, for all of this." She smiled, a mix of kindness and fierce determination in her eyes. "Thank you for your courage, Mark. You've done more than you know. Now, let's get you somewhere safe. Tomorrow's another day, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us." As we drove away from the forest, I leaned my head against the cool window, watching the trees blur past. The cabin was behind me now, but its shadow still loomed large. Yet amidst the darkness, a small spark of hope flickered. Justice was coming, slow, but sure, and I was determined to see it through to the end. Frustration mounted as weeks passed with no arrest, the killer seeming to have vanished into thin air. Each day brought a mixture of hope and disappointment as I waited for news from Officer Bennett or the task force assigned to the case. I paced the small apartment that had become my temporary safe house, feeling like a caged animal. The constant presence of a police guard outside my door was both reassuring and suffocating. "Any news?" I asked Officer Chen as he came in for his shift change. He shook his head, his expression sympathetic. "Nothing concrete yet, Mark, but we're following every lead. This guy can't hide forever." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "Thanks, Chen." I appreciate you keeping me in the loop. As the days wore on, paranoia began to set in. I constantly looked over my shoulder, afraid he might come after me for exposing him. Every creak in the old building, every shadow at the window, sent my heart racing. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying the horrors I'd experienced. The sound of my phone ringing jolted me out of my dark thoughts. My heart leaped into my throat as I answered. Hello? Mark, it's Officer Bennett. Sorry for the late call, but I thought you'd want to know. We've got a potential lead. I sat up, fully alert now. What kind of lead? One of the victims you identified from the photos. We've traced her last known whereabouts. It's given us a new area to focus on. Hope surged through me, but I tempered it with caution. We'd had leads before that had fizzled out. That's great news, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What can I do to help? For now, just stay put and stay safe, Bennett replied. We'll need you to look at some photos tomorrow, see if you can identify any potential suspects. After hanging up, sleep was impossible. My mind raced with possibilities. Could this be the break we'd been waiting for? The next day I sat in a small room at the police station, flipping through pages of mugshots and driver's license photos. Hours passed, my eyes growing strained from the endless parade of faces. Nothing, I sighed, pushing away the last binder. I'm sorry, I don't recognize any of them. Officer Bennett squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. It's okay, Mark. You've been a huge help already. We'll keep looking. As I prepared to leave, a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. An excited young officer burst into the room. We've got something, he exclaimed. A hiker reported seeing a man matching our suspect's description near the old mining town. Bennett was on her feet immediately. Get a team ready. We move in an hour. She turned to me, her expression serious. Mark, I know you want to be involved, but I need you to go back to the safe house. It's too dangerous for you to be out there. I wanted to argue, to insist on going with them, but I knew she was right. Just be careful, I said. And call me as soon as you know anything. The wait was excruciating. Hours passed with no word. I paced the apartment, checking my phone every few minutes, willing it to ring. Finally, late into the night, it did. Bennett, what happened? I asked, my voice tense. There was a heavy sigh on the other end. We found a cabin, Mark. It was definitely used recently, and it had similar items to the one you escaped from. My breath caught in my throat. But he wasn't there. We just missed him, left in a hurry by the looks of it. Disappointment crashed over me. So he's still out there? Yes, but we're closer than ever. We've got forensics going over every inch of that cabin. Something will turn up. After hanging up, I slumped onto the couch, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. We were making progress, but the monster was still free. The thought that he might be out there, watching, waiting for a chance to silence me, sent a chill down my spine. A knock at the door made me jump. Officer Chen poked his head in, his expression concerned. You okay, Mark? Heard you got some news. I nodded, running a hand through my hair. Yeah, just processing. It's hard, you know, knowing he's still out there. Chen sat down across from me. I can't imagine what you're going through. But I want you to know, we're not giving up. Every day, we're getting closer. His words were meant to be reassuring, but they also underscored the reality of my situation. This nightmare was far from over. As long as the killer was free, I would never truly be safe. Thanks, Chen, I said, managing a weak smile. I hope we find him before he hurts anyone else. As Chen left to resume his post outside, I walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, a murderer was walking free. But he was running now, and sooner or later he would make a mistake. I made a silent vow to myself and to all the victims whose faces haunted my dreams. I would see this through to the end, no matter how long it took. Justice would be served, and the shadows that had darkened so many lives would finally be banished. With renewed determination, I turned away from the window. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to bring a killer to justice, and I would be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Hope surged as a potential break in the case came, with a suspect identified based on the sketch I had helped create. The call from Officer Bennett came early in the morning, jolting me from a fitful sleep plagued by nightmares. "Mark, we need you to come down to the station," she said, her voice taut with urgency. "We may have a suspect in custody." My heart raced as I threw on clothes and hurried out the door, flanked by my ever-present police escort. The drive to the station felt interminable, my mind spinning with possibilities. Could this really be the end of the nightmare? As we entered the precinct, the air was charged with nervous energy. Officer Bennett met me at the door, her face a mask of professional calm. "Thanks for coming so quickly," she said, leading me through the bustling corridors. "I know this is difficult, but we need you to view a lineup. Remember, there's no pressure. If you don't recognize anyone, just say so." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. I want to help in any way I can." We entered a small, dimly lit room with a large one-way mirror. On the other side, I could see 5 men of similar build and appearance, each holding a number. "Take your time," Bennett said softly. "Let me know if you recognize anyone." My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the faces before me. Each man bore some resemblance to my captor, but as I looked closer, doubts began to creep in. The eyes weren't quite right on one, the jawline too soft on another. "Number 3, I said hesitantly. "He looks similar, but I'm not sure." Bennett nodded, making a note. "Anything else? Any of the others?" I looked again, desperately wanting to provide the breakthrough they needed, but the more I stared, the less certain I became. I'm sorry," I finally said, my voice cracking with disappointment. "None of them are him. I'm sure of it now." Bennett's shoulders sagged slightly, but she gave me a reassuring smile. "You did great, Mark. Negative identification is just as important as positive. It helps us narrow our focus." As we left the room, I could feel the weight of disappointment settling over me. "I really thought this might be it," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I know," Bennett replied, her voice sympathetic. "But every step brings us closer, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." We made our way to her office, where she offered me a cup of coffee. As I sipped the bitter brew, she updated me on the case. "We're back to square one with the immediate suspect," she admitted. "But the investigation is far from over. We're re-examining all the evidence, looking for anything we might have missed." Frustration built as we discussed the details. So many leads, so much evidence, yet the killer remained elusive. It felt like we were chasing a ghost. As Bennett spoke, my mind wandered, replaying memories of my captivity. Suddenly, a detail I'd forgotten surfaced. "Wait," I interrupted, sitting up straight. "I just remembered something. When he brought me food once, I noticed a tattoo on his wrist. It was partially covered by his sleeve, but I'm sure I saw part of an anchor." Bennett's eyes widened. "An anchor? Why didn't you mention this before?" I shook my head, frustration evident in my voice. "I don't know. It slipped my mind with everything else. I'm sorry." No, this is good," she said, already typing furiously on her computer. "An anchor tattoo could indicate military service, specifically Navy. It's not much, but it's a new avenue to explore." As she worked, I felt a spark of an idea forming. "Officer Bennett, what if we're looking in the wrong places? He knew those woods so well. What if he's not from the city at all, but from one of the small towns nearby?" Bennett paused, considering. "That's actually a very good point. We've been focusing our search on urban areas, but a rural background would explain his familiarity with the terrain." A renewed sense of purpose filled the room as Bennett made calls, setting new lines of inquiry into motion. For the first time in weeks, it felt like we were making real progress. As I prepared to leave, Bennett stopped me at the door. Mark, I want you to know how much we appreciate your help. Your insights, your memories, they're invaluable to this investigation. I nodded, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. I just want him caught. For all the victims, for their families, and yes, for myself too. I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe until he's behind bars. We'll get him, Bennett said, her voice filled with determination. It may take time, but we will bring him to justice. You have my word. As I left the station, escorted back to my safe house, I felt a cautious optimism growing. We hadn't caught him yet, but each day brought new clues, new possibilities. The net was tightening, slowly but surely. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the victims whose faces I'd seen in those horrific photographs. I made a silent promise to them, to myself, and to all the potential victims we might yet save. We're coming for you, I whispered into the darkness. You can run, you can hide, but we will find you, and when we do, you'll never hurt anyone ever again. With that thought, I drifted off into the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks, buoyed by the hope that justice, though slow, was steadily approaching. Excitement built as my new lead panned out, narrowing down the search area for the killer. The revelation about the anchor tattoo and the possibility of a rural background had energized the investigation. Officer Bennett had called me early in the morning, her voice brimming with barely contained enthusiasm. Mark, we've got something, she said. Your hunch about the small towns paid off. We've identified 3 potential locations that fit the profile. I sat up in bed, fully alert. That's great news. What's the next step? We're assembling a task force to raid these locations simultaneously, Bennett explained. I can't give you all the details, but I wanted you to know. We might be close to ending this. As I hung up the phone, a mix of emotions washed over me. Hope, fear, anticipation. They all swirled together, making it impossible to sit still. I paced the safe house, my mind racing with possibilities. Hours crawled by as I waited for news. The officer on duty, a young man named Rodriguez, tried to distract me with small talk, but I could barely focus on our conversation. You look like you're about to jump out of your skin, Rodriguez observed. Try to relax, man. These operations take time. I nodded, forcing a smile. I know. It's just, after all this time, to think it might finally be over. Rodriguez's radio crackled to life, and we both froze. He listened intently, his expression giving nothing away. When he finished, he turned to me with a grim smile. They've made contact at one of the locations. Shots fired. That's all I know for now. My heart pounded as I processed this information. Shots fired? Is anyone hurt? Did they get him? No details yet, Rodriguez said, shaking his head. We just have to wait. The next hour was the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump, expecting news at any moment. When my phone finally rang, I nearly dropped it in my haste to answer. Bennett, what happened? Did you find him? There was a heavy pause on the other end. Mark, we found him. There was a shootout. He's dead. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Dead? Are you sure it's him? We're certain, Bennett confirmed. The tattoo matches your description, and we found evidence in the house linking him to the cabins. It's over, Mark. He can't hurt anyone else. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Relief warred with a strange sense of anticlimax. After all this time, all the fear and anticipation, it had ended without me even being there. What about the officers? I asked, suddenly remembering the mention of shots fired. Is everyone okay? 2 officers were injured, but they're expected to make a full recovery, Bennett assured me. Mark, I know this is a lot to process. Would you like me to come over? I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. Yes, please. I think I need to hear all of this in person. An hour later, Bennett arrived at the safe house. She looked exhausted but satisfied as she sat across from me, a thick folder in her hands. "I thought you might want to see this," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "It's not pretty, but it's closure." With trembling hands, I opened the folder. Inside were crime scene photos, evidence logs, and a final report on the man who had tormented me and so many others. His name was Eric Lawson, a 52-year-old former park ranger with a history of violence. He'd been operating for over 2 decades, Bennett explained softly. "Your escape and testimony were what finally brought him down. You saved lives, Mark." I stared at the photo of Lawson, taken after the shootout. Even in death, his face sent a chill down my spine. I just wish, I don't know, that he could have faced justice in court. Bennett nodded understandingly. "I know. But at least now, he can never hurt anyone else. The families of his victims can start to find closure." As we talked through the details of the raid and the evidence they'd uncovered, a mix of emotions washed over me. Relief and sadness intertwined as I learned the full extent of Lawson's crimes. The number of victims was staggering, each life cut short a tragedy in itself. "What happens now?" I asked, closing the folder. I couldn't bear to look at those images any longer. "Now, we start the long process of notifying families, cataloging evidence, and closing cases," Bennett explained. "And for you, Mark, it means you can start to rebuild your life. The immediate danger is over." I nodded, trying to imagine a future without the constant fear that had been my companion for so long. "Will I need to testify? For the families?" "Possibly, at inquests or for insurance purposes," Bennett said. "But that's down the road. For now, focus on healing. You've been through a traumatic experience, and it's okay to take time to process it." As Bennett prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Mark, I want you to know how crucial your courage and persistence were in solving this case. You're a hero, whether you feel like one or not." After she left, I sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window at the city below. The nightmare was over, but I knew the memories would linger. The faces of the victims, the terror of my captivity, the long weeks of uncertainty, they had all left their mark. But as I watched the sun setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since my ordeal began, I could see a future beyond the fear. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in weeks. "Mom," I said when she answered, "it's over, they got him, I'm coming home." As I spoke those words, I felt the first tears of relief begin to fall. The nightmare was over, but the journey of healing was just beginning. Detective Sarah Reeves stepped out of her car, the cool night air nipping at her exposed skin. The abandoned warehouse loomed before her, its dilapidated structure a stark silhouette against the moonlit sky. She'd been chasing this lead for months, and now, finally, she was on the precipice of uncovering the truth behind the city's most notorious crime syndicate. As she approached the building, her partner, Mike Thompson, fell into step beside her. "You sure about this, Sarah?" he whispered, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. Sarah nodded grimly. "It's now or never, Mike. We've come too far to turn back." They entered the warehouse cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting eerie shadows across rusted machinery and forgotten crates. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the darkness. "Well, well, well, if it isn't Detroit's finest." Sarah and Mike spun around, guns drawn to face the source of the voice. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, imposing, with a face Sarah had memorized from countless case files. "Victor Crane," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You're under arrest." The crime lord chuckled, the sound sending chills down Sarah's spine. "I don't think so, Detective Reeves. You see, you're in my world now." With a snap of his fingers, lights flooded the warehouse. Sarah and Mike found themselves surrounded by at least a dozen armed men, all with weapons trained on them. "Drop your weapons," Crane commanded. or this ends badly for both of you. Mike glanced at Sarah, uncertainty clouding his features. She gave him a subtle nod, and they slowly placed their guns on the ground. Smart choice, Crane smirked. Now, let's have a little chat, shall we? I'm curious to know how you found this place. Sarah's mind raced, weighing her options. She decided honesty might be her best bet. We've been tracking your shipments for months. It was only a matter of time before we traced them back to the source. Crane's eyes narrowed. Impressive, but futile. You have no idea how deep this goes, Detective. The corruption, the lies. It reaches to the very top of your precious police force. Mike tensed beside her. You're bluffing, he growled. Am I? Crane raised an eyebrow. Tell me, Officer Thompson, how's your wife? Emma, isn't it? Shame about her gambling debts. The color drained from Mike's face. Sarah turned to him, shock evident in her expression. Mike, what's he talking about? Before Mike could respond, Crane continued. You see, Detective Reeves, your partner here has been quite helpful in keeping me informed of your investigation. In exchange, of course, for taking care of his wife's financial troubles. Sarah felt as if the ground had fallen out from beneath her feet. She stared at Mike, disbelief warring with a growing sense of betrayal. Tell me it's not true, she whispered. Mike couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Sarah, I didn't have a choice. They were going to hurt Emma. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All these months, all their work, compromised by the one person she trusted most. Crane's laughter echoed through the warehouse. Oh, this is delicious. The look on your face, Detective Reeves. Priceless. Sarah's shock quickly gave way to anger. She turned to Crane, her voice low and dangerous. You won't get away with this. There are good cops out there, ones you haven't bought. They'll find you. Perhaps, Crane shrugged. But you won't be around to see it. He raised his hand, and his men cocked their weapons. Sarah closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But the sound that filled the air wasn't gunfire. It was sirens. Lots of them. Crane's smug expression faltered. What the... The warehouse doors burst open, and a flood of police officers poured in, led by Captain Johnson himself. Police, everybody freeze. In the chaos that ensued, Sarah acted on instinct. She tackled Crane to the ground, wrestling him into handcuffs as the rest of his men were subdued around them. As the dust settled, Captain Johnson approached Sarah. Good work, Detective Reeves. Your wire picked up everything. Sarah stood, hauling Crane to his feet. She glanced at Mike, who was being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of defeat. It's over, Crane, she said, turning back to the crime lord. Your empire ends here. As she watched Crane being led away, Sarah felt a mix of triumph and sadness. They'd won, but at what cost? The night's events had shaken her faith in those she thought she could trust. But as she looked around at the honest cops doing their job, she realized that for every corrupt officer, there were many more fighting for justice. With a deep breath, she squared her shoulders. There would be time for reflection later. For now, there was work to do. The night was far from over, and this was just the beginning of dismantling Crane's network. But for the first time in months, Sarah felt hope. Hope that justice would prevail, and that the city she'd sworn to protect might finally see a brighter tomorrow. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as Sarah Reeves stood on the steps of the police precinct, watching the last of Victor Crane's men being escorted into the building. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but her mind was racing, still processing the events of the night. Detective Reeves. A young officer approached her, holding out a steaming cup of coffee. Thought you could use this. Sarah accepted the cup gratefully. Thanks, Officer Chen. Any word on the interrogations? Chen shook her head. Not yet. Captain Johnson's been in there for hours, but Crane's not talking. Sarah sighed, taking a sip of the bitter liquid. And Mike? A flicker of sympathy crossed Chen's face. Still in holding. He's asking to speak with you. Before Sarah could respond, Captain Johnson emerged from the building, his tie loosened and dark circles under his eyes. Reeves, a word? Sarah nodded to Chen and followed the captain inside. They made their way to his office, closing the door behind them. How are you holding up? Johnson asked, settling into his chair. Sarah shrugged, sinking into the seat across from him. I've been better, but we got Crane. That's what matters. Johnson leaned forward, his expression grave. Sarah, what happened last night? It's bigger than we thought. Crane's operation, the corruption, it goes deep, really deep. How deep are we talking, sir? The captain ran a hand over his face. We're looking at judges, city officials, even some feds. This isn't just about cleaning up the streets anymore. We're talking about dismantling an entire system of corruption. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What's our next move? For now, we keep this quiet. We can't risk tipping off anyone who might be involved. Johnson paused, studying her face. I hate to ask this of you, Sarah, but I need you to talk to Mike. See if you can get him to cooperate. He might be our best shot at unraveling this whole thing. Sarah's jaw clenched at the mention of her former partner. With all due respect, sir, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that job. I know he betrayed you, Sarah, but you're the one he trusts. If anyone can get through to him, it's you. After a moment of internal struggle, Sarah nodded. All right, I'll do it. She made her way down to the holding cells, her footsteps echoing in the quiet corridor. Mike looked up as she approached, his face a mixture of shame and relief. Sarah, he began, rising to his feet. Save it. Sarah cut him off, her voice cold. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here because we need your help. Mike's shoulders slumped. What do you want to know? Everything. Names, dates, locations, every dirty cop, every bribed official. I want it all. Mike sank back onto the bench, running his hands through his hair. You don't understand, Sarah. If I talk, they'll kill Emma. They'll kill me. And if you don't talk, how many more people will die because of Crane's operation? Sarah countered. How many more lives will be ruined? You think I don't know that? Mike's voice cracked. I never wanted any of this. I was just trying to protect my family. Sarah's expression softened slightly. I know, Mike, but now you have a chance to make it right. Help us take them down. All of them. We can protect you and Emma. Mike was quiet for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Finally, he looked up at Sarah, his eyes filled with determination. Okay, I'll tell you everything I know. For the next few hours, Sarah listened as Mike poured out every detail of Crane's operation. Names of corrupt officers, judges on the take, politicians in Crane's pocket. The list seemed endless. With each revelation, the magnitude of what they were up against became clearer. As Mike's story wound down, Sarah stood, her notebook filled with damning information. Thank you, Mike. This will help. Mike nodded, looking utterly drained. What happens now? Now, we build a case, and we take them all down. Sarah left the holding area, her mind reeling from everything she'd learned. She found Captain Johnson waiting for her. Well? He asked. Sarah handed him her notebook. It's worse than we thought, sir. Much worse. Johnson flipped through the pages, his expression growing grimmer with each turn. Christ, he muttered. This goes all the way to the mayor's office. What do we do? Sarah asked. The captain closed the notebook, a look of fierce determination on his face. We do our jobs, detective. We follow the evidence no matter where it leads. And we bring every last one of these bastards to justice. Sarah nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Where do we start? We start by building the strongest case we can. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick. We'll face resistance every step of the way, but we owe it to this city to see this through. As they walked back to the bullpen, Sarah felt the weight of the task ahead. The road would be long and fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, there was hope for real change in the city. One more thing, Reeves. Johnson said as they reached her desk. Trust no one outside of our immediate team. From now on, we operate in absolute secrecy. Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As she sat down at her desk, surrounded by the usual bustle of the precinct, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The real work was just beginning, and the future of the entire city hung in the balance. 3 weeks had passed since the night of Victor Crane's arrest, and Detective Sarah Reeves felt like she was walking on eggshells. The precinct hummed with an undercurrent of tension as she made her way to the small, windowless room that had become her team's base of operations. 2 months had passed since the night of Crane's arrest, and Detective Sarah Reeves felt like she had aged years. The investigation into the city's corruption had consumed her life, leaving little room for sleep or personal time. But today, everything was about to change. Sarah stood in the conference room, surrounded by stacks of files and evidence boards covered in photos and sticky notes. Captain Johnson paced nervously, while a small team of trusted officers waited in tense silence. The door opened, and in walked District Attorney Amelia Chen, followed by 2 stern-faced FBI agents. Detective Reeves, Chen greeted, her expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. I hope you have something good for us. Sarah nodded, gesturing to the evidence laid out before them. We do. Thanks to Mike Thompson's testimony and months of careful investigation, we're ready to move. She turned to the large screen on the wall, clicking through a series of photos and documents. But I want everything done by the book. We can't afford any mistakes that could jeopardize the case. Agreed, Sarah said. We've triple-checked every warrant, every piece of evidence. We're ready. Captain Johnson moved to the door. I'll brief the arrest teams. We move at dawn. As the room emptied, Sarah found herself alone with D.A. Chen. The attorney approached her, a look of concern on her face. Sarah, are you prepared for what comes next? Once we pull the trigger on this, there's no going back. The backlash will be intense. Sarah met Chen's gaze steadily. I know, but it's worth it. This city deserves better. Chen nodded, a small smile crossing her face. You're right. Just be careful. You've made a lot of powerful enemies. The next few hours passed in a blur of final preparations. As the first hints of daylight began to peek through the windows, Sarah found herself in a police van, speeding towards the home of Judge Martin Holloway, one of the key players in Crane's network. 2-minute warning, the driver called out. Sarah checked her vest one last time, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Beside her, Officer Chen, no relation to the DA, looked nervous. You okay? Sarah asked. Chen nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, just never thought I'd be arresting a judge. Remember, he's just another criminal, Sarah reassured him. We're doing the right thing. The van screeched to a halt and Sarah's team poured out, racing up the manicured lawn of the judge's mansion. Sarah pounded on the door, her voice ringing out in the early morning quiet. Judge Holloway, this is the police. We have a warrant for your arrest. For a moment there was silence, then the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. He's running, Sarah shouted. Chen, with me. They sprinted around the side of the house just in time to see Holloway, still in his pajamas, scrambling over the back fence. Sarah vaulted the fence with practiced ease, tackling the judge to the ground. Martin Holloway, you're under arrest for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice, she recited, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists. You have no idea what you're doing, Holloway spat, his face red with exertion and anger. Do you know who I am? Who my friends are? Sarah hauled him to his feet, meeting his glare with a steely gaze of her own. I know exactly who you are, Your Honor. And your friends? They're being arrested right now, all across the city. As she led Holloway back to the waiting police van, Sarah's radio crackled to life. Captain Johnson's voice came through, tight with tension, but tinged with triumph. Report in, all units. How copy? One by one the responses came in. Suspect in custody. Target secured. Arrest made without incident. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she guided Holloway into the van. "This is Detective Reeves. Judge Holloway is in custody. Mission accomplished." As the van pulled away, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. There would be trials, threats, and likely attempts at retaliation. But for the first time in years, she felt a genuine sense of hope for her city's future. The sun was fully up now, marking the dawn of a new era for the city, and Sarah Reeves was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The courthouse steps were a sea of reporters and flashing cameras. Detective Sarah Reeves stood at the top, flanked by Captain Johnson and District Attorney Chen. It had been 3 weeks since the mass arrests, and today marked the beginning of what the media had dubbed the trial of the century. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the press conference. D.A. Chen stepped forward, her voice clear and authoritative. "Good morning. Today we begin the process of bringing justice to those who have betrayed the public trust. The evidence we will present proves beyond doubt the existence of a vast criminal network that has corrupted our city government, our justice system, and our police force." As Chen continued, Sarah scanned the crowd, her eyes locked onto a familiar face, Mike Thompson, her former partner, now the state's star witness. He nodded slightly, his expression a mix of determination and fear. Suddenly, a voice shouted from the crowd, "Detective Reeves, how do you respond to allegations that this is a politically motivated witch hunt?" Before Sarah could answer, Captain Johnson stepped in. "We follow the evidence, nothing more. Politics has no place in our investigation." As they made their way into the courthouse, Sarah felt a hand on her arm. It was Chen, her expression grave. "We have a problem. Judge Holloway's lawyer is moving to suppress Thompson's testimony, claims it was coerced." Sarah's stomach dropped. "That's ridiculous. Mike came to us voluntarily." "I know, but Holloway's team is pulling out all the stops. We need to be prepared for anything." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Sarah sat behind the prosecution table watching as Judge Holloway and his co-defendants filed in. The former judge met her gaze, his eyes cold with hatred. The proceedings began, and Holloway's lawyer, a slick operator named Davidson, approached the bench. "Your Honor, we move to suppress the testimony of Michael Thompson on the grounds that it was obtained under duress." The judge, a stern woman named Harriet Lawson, peered over her glasses. "On what grounds, Mr. Davidson?" "Mr. Thompson was facing serious charges himself. We contend that the prosecution offered him an illegally favorable deal in exchange for fabricated testimony against my client." D.A. Chen was on her feet immediately. "That's absurd, Your Honor. Mr. Thompson came to us of his own free will, and his testimony is corroborated by extensive physical evidence." Judge Lawson considered for a moment. "I'll hear arguments on this motion in my chambers. Court is in recess for 1 hour." As the courtroom emptied, Sarah pulled Chen aside. "This is bad. If we lose Thompson's testimony..." Chen nodded grimly. "I know, but we've got more than just Mike. Remember, we're playing the long game here." An hour later, everyone filed back into the courtroom. Judge Lawson cleared her throat. "After careful consideration, I'm denying the motion to suppress. Mr. Thompson's testimony will be allowed." A collective sigh of relief went through the prosecution team. Davidson looked furious, whispering frantically to Holloway. As the trial proceeded, Sarah watched Mike take the stand. He looked pale but determined as he recounted the details of the corruption he'd witnessed and participated in. "And who was at the head of this operation?" D.A. Chen asked. Mike's voice was steady. "Victor Crane was the boss, but Judge Holloway was his main connection to the legal system. Nothing happened in this courthouse without Holloway's approval." Davidson stood for cross-examination, his voice dripping with contempt. "Mr. Thompson, isn't it true that you only turned state's evidence to save your own skin?" Mike met his gaze unflinchingly. "I came forward because what we were doing was wrong. I'm not proud of my actions, but I'm trying to make it right." As the day wore on, Sarah found herself in the courthouse cafeteria, nursing a cup of mediocre coffee. Captain Johnson joined her, looking weary. "How are you holding up, Reeves?" Sarah shrugged. I'll feel better when this is over. It's like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Johnson nodded in understanding. I know the feeling. But remember, we've got them on the ropes. They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Parking garage, level 3, come alone. Sarah showed Johnson the message. His brow furrowed. Could be a trap. I'll have a team on standby. Heart pounding, Sarah made her way to the parking garage. As she stepped onto the 3rd level, a figure emerged from behind a pillar. It was Emma, Mike's wife. Mrs. Thompson? What are you doing here? Emma looked around nervously. I shouldn't be here, but I found something. Something Mike didn't know about. She handed Sarah a USB drive. It's all here. Account numbers, dates, everything. Holloway wasn't just Crane's connection. He was planning to take over the whole operation. Sarah's mind raced. If this was true, it could blow the case wide open. Emma, this is incredibly dangerous. Why are you doing this? Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. Because Mike is trying to do the right thing. And so am I. As Emma hurried away, Sarah clutched the drive, feeling the weight of its potential. She knew that what happened next could change everything. The trial, the investigation, the future of the city. It all hinged on what was on this tiny piece of plastic. With renewed determination, Sarah headed back to the courthouse. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months she felt like they might actually win this war. The courtroom was packed to capacity as Sarah Reeves took the stand. The USB drive from Emma Thompson had proven to be a goldmine of information, and now it was time to lay it all out. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her as she was sworn in. District Attorney Chen approached, her demeanor calm but determined. Detective Reeves, can you please tell the court about the evidence you discovered regarding Judge Holloway's involvement in Victor Crane's criminal enterprise? Sarah took a deep breath. Yes, thanks to new evidence that came to light, we were able to uncover a series of encrypted communications between Judge Holloway and Victor Crane. These messages detailed not just Holloway's complicity in Crane's operations, but his plans to usurp control of the entire network. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Lawson banged her gavel. Order, Chen continued. Can you elaborate on the nature of these plans? Certainly, Sarah replied. The messages outlined a strategy to systematically eliminate Crane's key lieutenants, replacing them with individuals loyal to Holloway. He planned to use his position within the justice system to ensure these murders would go uninvestigated. From the defense table, Holloway's face had turned an alarming shade of red. His lawyer, Davidson, was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is the first we're hearing of this so-called evidence. The prosecution is in clear violation of discovery rules. Judge Lawson turned to Chen. Counselor? Chen was prepared. Your Honor, this evidence only came into our possession 48 hours ago. We've been working around the clock to verify its authenticity. We submitted it to the defense as soon as that verification was complete, as per the rules of discovery. The courthouse was eerily quiet as Sarah Reeves made her way through the dim corridors. It was well past midnight, but sleep had become a luxury she could ill afford. The trial of Judge Holloway and his co-conspirators had stretched into its 3rd week, each day bringing new revelations and heightened tensions. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she approached the small office that had become her temporary headquarters. As she reached for the door handle, a voice behind her made her freeze. Working late, Detective? She spun around to find District Attorney Chen emerging from the shadows, looking as exhausted as Sarah felt. Amelia? Sarah sighed, relaxing slightly. You startled me. What are you doing here at this hour? Chen held up a thick file. Same as you, I imagine. Trying to stay one step ahead of Davidson and his tricks. They entered the office together, Sarah flicking on the harsh fluorescent lights. Papers and evidence boxes cluttered every surface, a visual representation of the case's complexity. Any progress on the USB drive Emma Thompson gave you? Chen asked, settling into a chair. Sarah shook her head, frustration evident in her voice. The tech team is still working on it. Holloway was paranoid. Everything's encrypted. But they're close to a breakthrough, I can feel it. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. Sarah, we need to talk about what happens next. Even if we get Holloway, even if we take down his entire network, there's going to be a power vacuum. You think someone else will try to step in and take Crane's place? Sarah said. It wasn't a question. It's inevitable, Chen replied. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does organized crime. We need to be prepared. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Captain Johnson entered, his face grim. We've got a problem, he announced without preamble. Mike Thompson is missing. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Missing? What do you mean, missing? Johnson ran a hand over his face. He never made it back to the safe house after today's testimony. His protective detail lost him in traffic. Or they were paid to lose him, Chen muttered. Sarah was already on her feet, grabbing her jacket. We need to find him. Now, if something's happened to Mike. Hold on, Johnson said, placing a hand on her shoulder. We've got units out looking, but we can't risk you getting involved directly. You're too close to this, Sarah. She shrugged off his hand, anger flashing in her eyes. With all due respect, sir, I'm already involved. Mike risked everything to help us. I'm not going to abandon him now. Chen stood up, her voice calm but firm. Sarah, think about this. If you go off half-cocked and something happens, it could jeopardize the entire case. Everything we've worked for could fall apart. Sarah paused, conflict clear on her face. She knew they were right, but the thought of Mike in danger gnawed at her conscience. Suddenly her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her eyes widened. It's Emma. She put the phone on speaker. Emma, what's going on? Emma's voice came through, tight with fear. Sarah, they took him. They took Mike. Who took him, Emma? Where are you? I don't know who they are, but they left a message for you. There was a pause, then Emma's voice returned, reciting mechanically. The pier, 1 hour. Come alone, or he dies. The line went dead. Sarah looked up at Johnson and Chen, determination etched on her face. I have to go. Johnson shook his head. Absolutely not, it's obviously a trap. But if I don't go, they'll kill Mike, Sarah argued. We can't just abandon him. Chen stepped between them, her mind clearly racing. Wait, maybe there's a way we can turn this to our advantage. For the next 45 minutes, they huddled together, formulating a plan. It was risky, with a dozen ways it could go wrong, but it was the best chance they had. As Sarah prepared to leave, Chen caught her arm. Be careful out there. Remember, we're not just fighting for Mike. We're fighting for the soul of this city. Sarah nodded, her jaw set. I know. And that's why we can't lose. She stepped out into the night, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. As she drove towards the pier, her mind raced through all the possibilities. Who had taken Mike? Was it Holloway's people? Or someone new trying to make a move? The pier loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. Sarah parked her car and stepped out, her hand resting on her concealed weapon. The salty air whipped around her as she walked towards the end of the pier, every sense on high alert. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was Mike, battered and bruised, with a gun pressed to his head. Behind him stood a man Sarah had never seen before, his face twisted in a cruel smile. Detective Reeves, he called out. So good of you to join us. Now let's talk about how this is going to end. Sarah's mind raced. This wasn't Holloway's doing. This was something new, something they hadn't anticipated. As she stared into the eyes of this unknown enemy, she realized that the real battle for the city's future was only just beginning. The pier creaked beneath Sarah's feet as she took a cautious step forward, her eyes never leaving the man holding Mike hostage. The gun pressed against Mike's temple glinted in the dim light of the nearby street lamps. "That's far enough, detective," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I'd hate for things to get messy so soon." Sarah raised her hand slowly, showing she was unarmed. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man chuckled, a sound that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Who I am isn't important. What I want, however, is quite simple. I want you to back off." "Back off?" Sarah repeated, buying time. She knew the team was in position, but she needed to keep him talking. Back off from what exactly? The man's grip on Mike tightened, causing him to wince. "Don't play dumb, detective. This little crusade of yours against Holloway and his friends? It ends now. Or your friend here takes a swim with some concrete shoes." Mike's eyes met Sarah's, a mix of fear and determination in them. "Don't listen to him, Sarah. You can't—" The man silenced Mike with a sharp jab of the gun. "Quiet, you. The adults are talking." Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. This man wasn't working for Holloway. He was too confident, too in control. This was someone new, someone looking to fill the power vacuum left by Crane's arrest. "Look," Sarah said, taking another careful step forward. "Whatever you're planning, it's not going to work. We've got evidence that goes way beyond Holloway. This isn't something you can just make disappear." The man's smile widened. "Oh, but I think it is. You see, detective, you've been so focused on cleaning up the old guard that you failed to notice the new players entering the game. By the time you realize what's happening, it'll be too late." Suddenly, Mike made his move. He threw his head back, catching his captor in the nose. The man stumbled, his grip on the gun loosening. "Sarah, now!" Mike yelled. Sarah didn't hesitate. She drew her concealed weapon and fired, the shot echoing across the pier. The man cried out, the bullet grazing his arm, causing him to drop the gun. In an instant, the pier erupted into chaos. Police officers seemed to materialize from the shadows, converging on the scene with weapons drawn. "Police, drop your weapon!" Captain Johnson's voice boomed through a megaphone. The man, realizing he was surrounded, raised his hands in surrender. "This isn't over," he snarled as officers moved in to handcuff him. Sarah rushed to Mike, helping him to his feet. "Are you okay?" Mike nodded, rubbing his wrists where they had been bound. "Yeah, I think so. Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have been more careful." "It's not your fault," Sarah interrupted. "But we need to get you somewhere safe. This isn't over yet." As paramedics checked Mike over, Sarah approached the captured man, who was now seated in the back of a police car. She leaned in, her voice low and intense. "You're right. This isn't over, but maybe you'd like to tell me who you're working for before things get worse for you." The man smirked. "You have no idea what you're up against, detective. This goes deeper than you can imagine. Arresting me won't change anything." Before Sarah could respond, D.A. Chen appeared at her side. "Sarah, we need to talk. Now." They stepped away from the car, Chen's expression grave. "The USB drive Emma gave you? Our tech team finally cracked it. It's big, Sarah. Bigger than we thought." "How big are we talking?" Chen took a deep breath. "Federal big. There are names on here that go all the way up to Washington. Senators, agency directors. This isn't just about cleaning up our city anymore. We're looking at a nationwide conspiracy." Sarah felt the weight of this revelation settle on her shoulders. "So what do we do now?" "For now, we keep this quiet," Chen replied. "We need to bring in the feds, but carefully. There's no telling who we can trust." As they spoke, Captain Johnson joined them, his face etched with concern. "We've got another problem. Someone took a shot at Judge Lawson's house. She's fine, but shaken. This is escalating fast." Sarah looked out over the water, the city lights reflecting off its surface. The enormity of what they were facing was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just about Holloway or Crane anymore. They were up against something much larger, much more insidious. "We need to regroup," Sarah said finally. "Get Mike and Emma to a secure location. Then we need to go through everything on that drive. If we're going to take this on, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. As they began to disperse, Sarah caught sight of a figure watching from the shadows near the end of the pier. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Before she could react, the figure melted away into the darkness. Sarah knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and the fate of not just their city, but perhaps the entire country hung in the balance. As she climbed into her car, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped onto a much larger, much more dangerous playing field. And somewhere out there, hidden in the shadows, their true enemy was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike.